costs of energy, considering the end-to-end process. Welcome, everyone. This is me. Let me put my card very shortly. And this is Mark Mills. You can read his brief bio on the card because the size of his bio is something big. Mark is a great reference in the energy sector, global energy sector. Welcome, Mark. It's a pleasure to have you in our podcast today. Thank you.
It's a pleasure to join you. Thanks for the invitation.
Fantastic. Let me remove this card from here and put both here. Mark, let me start with consider the main source of energy. Energy for electricity, let's see, such as coal, natural gas, nuclear, renewables. What's your view on the real costs that are not always visible or intentionally
Right.
hidden?
Well, first, I mean, we have to frame it as you're narrowing it to electricity, but as you well know, only about 20% of global energy is used to make electricity. So the ecosystem of the world is driven primarily by non-electric energy. Electricity is extraordinarily important. There are a lot of things you can't do without electricity: lasers, computers, modern illumination. So these are important, but from a macro perspective, I think it's really critical to have that in mind. And most of the hidden costs are what you would call national subsidies, behaviors of nation states to subsidize behind the scenes, or not so much behind the scenes, but to subsidize and steer either through money or permissions or lack of permissions, avoidance of regulations, those kinds of things. Those are the real hidden costs in terms of the economics. I mean, economics without subsidies are pretty easy to figure out for any energy system. It's just an engineering question. What can you build? What does it cost? And then what are the outcomes? But that doesn't tell you what the cost of energy is to deliver to people because of all the taxes and subsidies. That's one issue. You may be referring to the other issue, which is what does it really take to deliver energy? The hidden non-economic costs, which have economic features. For example, depending on another country. In 1973 and 74, the U.S. was very dependent on Middle East oil, far more than today, by a lot. And the King Faisal at the time, as most energy historians know, engineered a boycott of shipping to stop shipping oil to the United States. That caused a 400% increase in global oil prices over a period of about 4 or 5 months. Can you imagine today how world's politicians would react if the price of oil went up 400% over a few months? It'd be catastrophic panics. That's a hidden cost, dependencies. Geopolitical risks because of those dependencies, where somebody doesn't exercise that kind of punitive power, but let's call it steers their behaviors in geopolitics. Good example of that is when Europe became very dependent on inexpensive Russian natural gas. Then the Ukraine war happens. They didn't have much leverage over Russia because of their dependencies. That's a cost. And of course, then there are the environmental costs. So those are the ones that we typically most conveniently ignore. That is environmental costs in other countries. So those who consume a product that requires the mining of nickel, which is needed for all steel, really are generally not aware of where the nickel comes from. And whether in those countries, those nation states exercise the kind of environmental caution we would like in our country, whether it's Brazil, Canada, United States. Canada's where I come from. Mm-hmm. And those are hidden, but from day-to-day life, they're not hidden in the sense that you can go find out. You can go do research. So that's sort of the array of things that I would call hidden costs in energy.
You mentioned that only 20% of the total energy is directed to electricity. Yeah. And the other 80%, what's the distribution we have?
Typically, so gross heat, just heating, broadly speaking. So there's two kinds of heating: space heating, that's heating up spaces we live in, which is low temperature heat.
Okay.
And then high temperature heat, which are needed for industrial processes to make chemicals and steel, aluminum. There's all kinds of things that require very high temperatures, pharmaceuticals, and for some parts of the processes require. So that's industrial heating, and of course, transportation. And so transportation, is not just cars. Cars consume about a quarter of world transportation energy.
Wow. Yeah.
Most people think most of it, it's not. So industrial machines, big trucks, backhoes, ships, aircraft, all the transportation machinery collectively. So the world, an advanced economy like Brazil or United States, about a third of all energy goes into electricity. So in those countries, 2/3 still goes into industrial processes and heating.
From oil, 20% goes to, I suppose, petrochemical production,
Right.
6,000 products that we use every day.
Right.
And the other 80% may be exactly what you are talking about.
Exactly.
Diesel, for fuel, for jets, for everything.
Well,
yeah.
Most people are not aware of the fact that the largest industrial energy consuming sector is mining.
Yeah.
And mining is extraordinarily dependent on oil for the big machines and moving the materials, coal for producing the power in the world that does the mining, and natural gas, again, for process heat. It's an enormously large energy consuming sector, a very big oil consuming sector, and very difficult to substitute oil, coal, and gas in that sector, just as it's very difficult to substitute for oil in aviation, and far harder to substitute for it in cars than people realize. That would be really easy. It turns out it's not that easy.
Yeah, only a small part of cars, light vehicles, that can use electricity, because the heavy trucks and things like that.
Yeah, it's a car, but for a very significant market in wealthy countries, United States, Brazil, in Canada, just put very simplistically, every household that has 2 or more cars, which is a very large percentage in the United States, which roughly 30% of households have 2 or more cars. Some have 3 or 4. In households like that, a second or third car that's electric and plugged in overnight is very useful, very practical, very handy. And that's a market that already has a lot of money, is happy to pay a little extra. And that's not a trivial number of cars. That's, in the United States, that's probably 30 million cars that could become electric.
A big number, yeah.
But remember, there's 200 million vehicles in the United States. So.
The percent is very small compared to the total.
And globally, there's 1.4 billion cars on the global roads today. So,
look at the energies, available energies that we have for electricity and for logistics, as we talk. Which of them you see that will be winners in the long term? Natural gas, nuclear.
Yeah.
How do you see the energies?
Well, so there's 2 parts. First, the short answer is all of them are winners in the sense that every energy form that we now use, we'll use more of in the foreseeable future. So the idea of an energy transition to abandon, stop using, radically reduce or stop using current energy forms, coal, oil, and gas, is fictitious, isn't happening, and it's never happened in history. So I wanted to start with a predicate. People have in their heads that inevitably we transition away from old energy forms like wood and grains used to fuel horses and beasts of burden for industrial purposes and transportation, or hydropower, or wind, and all these things we use windmills in the 16th century around the world, and hydropower, water power, has been around since ancient Greece and Roman times. Not exactly new, but if you do it in absolute terms, quantities of energy used by society over all of history, none of them do we use less of today. None. The world uses more wood for energy today than it did any time in history.
Wow, really?
Yeah. But as a percentage of all our energy, it's much smaller. But when people mean transition, what they mean is we're going to abandon something. We're not abandoning anything. In fact, the use of animals fed by grain, so grain is the energy source to fuel the animal for industrial purposes, for transportation, for carrying things, bigger today than any time in history. There are more animals used in an industry, transportation industry today globally, than any time in human history. So, but as a percentage of all transportation of goods and services, it's trivial. because the world's bigger and it's fueled by other things. But we didn't transition away, even in the United States, by the way. Combustion of wood for energy is greater today than 100 years ago. But again, as a percentage of our energy, it's a couple percent. But I say that as a preamble to another observation. Even though the world is spent, by the world, mostly the wealthy world, trillions of dollars to build more windmills and solar panels, as of right now, burning wood globally supplies twice as much energy as all the windmills and solar panels in the world combined. So I think in about 5 years, 10, solar and wind will surpass wood. But wood's not going away. It's just that they'll surpass wood. What they won't surpass is oil, gas, and coal, because the quantities are so staggeringly large as to be very hard to visualize.
I saw one of your videos, and as you mentioned, mining, and let me go to the high dependence on foreign manufacturing that the United States has at this time, because importing solar panels, wind turbines, is something that puts energy security in doubt. How do you see this dependence? And people are applying money on these things and growing without the research enough.
Yeah. Well, first, it's as you point out, and this comes from the International Energy Agency. They weren't the first to point this out, or the only. But the need for critical minerals, by critical, it typically means minerals that are harder to acquire than iron ore or aluminum, which are very, very common metals in the Earth's crust. The metals like copper, nickel, manganese, cobalt, dysprosium, the rare earth elements like neodymium, protactinium. There's all kinds of crazy named elements for people who don't remember their high school chemistry class in the periodic table. Those metals and minerals are needed in higher quantities to make batteries, windmills, and solar panels than conventional energy systems. A lot more. Depending on the product, somewhere between 400% and 7,000% more metals and more mining are needed to produce a unit of energy to move a car if it's battery powered than if it's oil powered. Same would be true if you want to make electricity with wind and solar instead of using, say, combustion gas turbines or coal or nuclear. You need 1,000% more minerals per unit of energy delivered. Now, you'd say, well, what does that matter? Well, it matters because that means you have to mine 1,000% more rock. And once you know how much rock the world already mines, you might want to do some arithmetic here. This is just arithmetic. The rocks to minerals ratio is very well known. It's called the ore grade, the percentage of rock that contains, say, copper or molybdenum or whatever. These are very well known numbers in geology, and you can calculate how many tons of rock you need to mine to make something. For example, a typical electric car, the battery weighs half a ton, 1,000 pounds. That's to replace a fuel tank that would have nominally 70 pounds of gasoline in it.
Yeah.
So, but you can reuse the battery, unlike the fuel tank. When it's empty, the 70 pounds are consumed. Yeah. But it still weighs 1,000 pounds. That's not nothing. To fabricate that one single 1,000-pound battery pack for an electric car, you have to mine somewhere on Earth 500,000 pounds of rock to get the quantity of metals and minerals needed to make that one battery. That's a lot because, millions of cars, you're now getting to megatons of rock. So take it back to the highest level of abstraction. Then you'd want to know, where is that mining happening? Where is the refining going on?
Remote place, yeah.
It's extremely well known. It's around the world, Africa, South America, a lot of it in Brazil, a lot of my homeland in Canada. Yeah. But the majority of the refining, once the mining is done, for most of these critical minerals is done in China. China has a market share of global refining for critical minerals from 50 to 90% on most of the critical minerals.
My God.
It's a market concentration that's triple OPEC's concentration of oil. So this is, you could say, who cares? Well, geopolitically, it obviously creates some asymmetries, let's call it, and risks. For the United States, it's already created some risks. The United States depends very highly on these imports. And if they don't import the minerals, they import them at thing that was made with the minerals, like the solar cell, gets it made in China. It's imported to the United States. It's worth pointing out that China's electric system, which does the refining, is 2/3 fueled by coal.
Mhm.
So not only when you put a solar array on your roof in Brazil or United States, are you importing solar cells, 90% of which are made in China, but you are exporting coal consumption, because for a typical small house, about 30 tons of Chinese coal will have been burned to fabricate the silicon to make those solar cells. So
Well,
you put the solar array on your roof and you're thinking you're being virtuous, avoiding the coal consumption or
it's not,
natural
it's
gas,
not
or the
true.
hydro dam up at the Itaipu Dam in Brazil. This well, yes, you are. You're avoiding using that electricity and the water, but you've just consumed, you personally, 30 tons of Chinese coal.
Yeah.
This is
So,
the nature of those are the hidden things that are, again, easy to find
Yeah.
if people are curious, but most people, unfortunately, aren't curious enough to go look.
yeah, it's a bad compensation. It's not good. Let me show. This guy is a specialist in decommissioning, a geologist, a friend of us, and looking to his comments. What about the cost of waste management and plant decommissioning compared renewables and comparing to oil and gas? Because it's not easy. Oil and gas decommissioning is something complex. Sometimes it's complex.
Yeah.
How
You
do
talking
you
about
see?
You talking about the decommissioning at the end of useful life? Is that?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. At the end of life.
So again, this is sort of, I'm a physicist, so I sort of work from basic principles. Everything wears out. Entropy always wins. It's not just human bodies that wear out. You build machines, they wear out. Everything wears out. What that means is that everything ends up as waste. Everything. Waste heat, waste materials. And so when a machine wears out, you can maintain it up to a point, but there's always a point at which can be maintained. It's worn out. That becomes waste. So humans produce waste because it's the nature of the universe we live in. You say, well, I can reuse and recycle, right? Well, it's true up to a point. So there's a couple of things about reusing and recycling. First, it always has a cost. You're doing engineering, you're handling things. So if we're honest about the costs, that is, not hide them through subsidies, what we find is that most things, the cost to recycle and reuse is greater than the cost of getting the virgin material and building a new machine.
Oh, great.
Not all. Very easy to recycle aluminum and steel, for example. But the tiny fractions of neodymium, for example, in a wind turbine are very hard to recapture. It takes a lot of time and money and handling to break things down, remelt them down. And so, the UN tracks this issue, and the percentage of recycling for most metals is, 5%, few percent, 10%. It's very difficult, very expensive. And it has an environmental impact too. Think about it. If you have something that's garbage that can't hurt you, a wind turbine blade, which can't be recycled, by the way, when it's worn out, you bury it. It's not going to hurt anybody. It's going to melt, not going to contaminate anything. Recycling means you have to cut it up and use chemicals to dissolve it, and do all those things involve energy and then chemistry and chemicals, and they involve pollution and waste. So the life cycle of recycling has costs, environmental impacts. And the truth is, whether we like it or not, things become waste, then they become trash. And then we have to make decisions about how much we want to spend to give the illusion that we're reducing environmental impact by recycling it, versus those technologies that can be recycled cost effectively. By and large, I'm being very simplistic, the market is very good at figuring out when something's valuable and recycling it. Copper, aluminum, steel, very easy to recycle. Therefore, people recycle them. Very high percent. Lead's very easy to recycle. We recycle a lot of that.
Lithium is not so simple to recycle, is it?
Lithium? No, well, it's not. And of course, lithium is not worth recycling because it's very easy to get. So the recycling costs are high compared to a very low cost material. Some things are very, very, very cheap to acquire, even though there's the illusion that lithium is rare. Lithium is a very common element. And as you know, the big lithium mines not far from your homeland in Brazil have massive quantities of lithium. Australia has huge quantities of lithium. So the issue is with the technology we have available, what does it cost and what are the effects of using it? And in both cases, people are being a little naive. It's not like, it's a glass bottle, aluminum can in my hand.
Yeah.
I just throw it in the right bin and it's easy to recycle. That's true for some things, but it's not true for a lot of things.
Yeah. Mark, considering people are talking that artificial intelligence is coming to a bubble and things like that, but data centers are growing very fast. And what energies you see that will support this type of growing?
Well, so the data center issue is a fascinating one. I've been writing about it for decades. In fact, the first data center was built in the United States in 1998 in Silicon Valley. So the proliferation of data centers was going on for about 2.5 decades. And there's millions of square feet. There's in the United States alone, there's 5,000 data centers. Globally, call it 8,000, 10,000. Most of them are in the United States so far. That was sort of the home of the internet, and more than half of the global internet traffic flows through the United States data centers still, probably closer to 70%. So most people have in their head that the internet's virtual. You and I are using a virtual medium. We don't have to. I love Brazil. I enjoy visiting there, but I didn't have to fly down there to do this with you. So we're consuming electrons and photons, which look weightless and virtual. Thing is, all this stuff has to exist in machinery. It takes energy to build the machines, energy to operate the machines. So even before the advent of artificial intelligence, the global communications ecosystem, the global cloud, which is what I wrote about in my book, The Cloud Revolution, as you know.
Do you have the book here to show to us? No, it's not available.
No, I don't have it. We'll have to use the magic Amazon or Google machine if you just type in Mark Mills, The Cloud Revolution. So I described the history and state of the cloud and its implications for the global economy, in particular, of course, the U.S. economy, where I'm based. But the cloud was, before AI, an ecosystem all used more electricity in the country of Japan. So the transporting information takes energy, storing it takes energy, the data centers take energy, the networks take energy, wireless stuff takes energy, all takes energy. A lot more than most people realize. I'll put it in very simple terms. You and all your listeners have a smartphone. Nobody doesn't have a smartphone. There's billions in the world. The pro rata share quantity of electricity that you use for your smartphone is about equal to the refrigerator in your kitchen.
Wow.
But the electricity that's using is not in your phone. It's in the networks that support your phone. So your share of the network and data center energy is about a refrigerator, soon 2 refrigerators. And if you do that times, billions of phones, that's where you get to the country of Japan worth of electricity being consumed by the networks and data centers. The artificial intelligence chips, because they run flat out all the time, are much more like a race car running at a racetrack and a Formula One track than they are like the car you use and I use to drive. You use your car episodically. You don't run it flat out all the time. If you're on a racetrack, you run a car if you're running in a 24-hour Le Mans race, car is running 24 hours. GPUs, artificial intelligence, are more like that. So when you put artificial intelligence chips into a data center, its energy use goes up because the nature of what machine learning and inference is, it just uses more power inherently. So that everybody's now just rediscovered the fact that I just laid out, that data uses energy. Now AI uses even more. And the big debate we're having now is how much more? Well, the answer is a lot. The IEA put out a study saying, well, on the global scale, artificial intelligence won't use as much new electricity as adding more air conditioning to the parts of the world that are underserved by air conditioning. Well, that's true, because much of the world is underserved by air conditioning, including Europe.
Yeah.
But for the industrialized countries like Europe and the United States and Brazil, the marginal demands for electricity have been slowing down for the last 2 decades until now. Now they're taking off again because of this new modality for compute. I mean, I would, if I were giving you an approximation, we should expect that the demand for electricity from computing because of AI will double or triple in the sorry about that, in the coming in the coming 5-6 years. How fast it'll grow after that is hard to guess because of a combination of utility, use function, efficiency gains. But for the next 3 to 5 years, we don't have to guess very hard about the energy use because the kinds of changes in the technology that could be implemented to make it more efficient take a few years to implement and install. So for the next 3 years, we have a pretty good idea about at least a doubling. In the United States, that's very meaningful. It'd probably be meaningful in Brazil. Globally, it's kind of in the noise because the truth is globally, there's a lot more underserved needs for the world in terms of food, transportation, lighting, basic computing, and basic internet.
Yeah, interesting. At the same time, China is using coal to support this growing.
And
But
we're using natural gas mostly. In the United States.
yeah.
And
natural gas.
Europe is using very little of either because they're not growing.
Yeah, and nuclear is almost impossible because the time to implement a nuclear power system is so long.
This is the problem. So one can build a data center in 18 months to 2 years.
Yeah.
And in that 18 months to 2 years, a single data center could require 200 to 500 or 800 megawatts of power, which is approaching a nuclear power plant size. And as everybody knows, even in China, where they build them quickly, it takes 5 or 6 years to build a nuclear plant. And in countries like yours and the United States, it takes much longer than that. We've lost our appetite and infrastructure to build them quickly. I think the Western world will restore that. We're going to do that. We're on track to spending the money to do that. And I think nuclear power will play a very big role in marginal electricity supply starting in about 10 years from now. But for the next decade, we're going to see the marginal electricity demands of the world met by natural gas in the developed world, in the emerging markets by coal and natural gas.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, wind and solar will play a significant role. There's a lot being built, but they're not going to do it all. In fact, on the margin, maybe they do a quarter to a third, which should be a lot.
Mm-hmm.
But then the rest is still needed, which is where the gas, coal, and hydro dams come in.
Mm-hmm. There's a question from the audience. What's the major challenge to replace the petroleum, gas, and coal in the energy sector?
The major challenge, I guess, is very simple. Hydrocarbon fuels are remarkable, especially oil and gas, and features that they possess that are very difficult to replicate. Cost, incredibly cheap. Efficacy of transport, very easy to move. Efficacy of storage, very easy to store. So you have to always store energy because you can't guarantee the vicissitudes of nature and supply chains and demands.
Yeah.
So just to give a context, the cheapest batteries cost 100 times more to store a unit of energy than just putting oil or natural gas into a tank. 100 times more.
Yeah.
So that's why you don't store society levels of energy yet in batteries because the costs are crazy high. So the essence of the problem is that 80% of the world's energy comes from oil, gas, and coal. That percentage has been roughly the same for 25, 30 years. Even as the world's expanded and we produce more wind and solar and we've spent trillions subsidizing non-oil, non-gas, non-coal, the absolute quantity of hydrocarbons consumed has increased by the amount equal to adding 6 Saudi Arabia's worth of oil production. That's the increase in oil, gas, coal production in oil equivalent terms. Yeah. There's been a huge increase in wind, solar, and batteries, and they've increased their share from negligible to around 14% of the world's electricity, which again is only about 2.5% of world's energy, because energy is more than just electricity. So the principal impediments to come back to is cost, transportability that's feasible at a price, and storability that's feasible at a price at scale. The world uses astonishing amounts of energy. Scale is the thing that people fail to understand.
Yeah, very interesting. Before we go to the last question, to not pass too much from the 30 minutes let me put the books from Mark. Are these ones, The Cloud Revolution?
Exactly. Yeah.
Digital Cathedrals and the Information System. But you mentioned another one. It's a different one.
Work of the Age of Machines.
It's not here in the list. Yeah. Mark, going to the last point, please. Do you see that the world is politically prepared to address these questions openly to discuss without paradigms. I mean, considering the end-to-end process. Do you see the world prepared for that or not, and why?
Well, the world at large has been doing what's possible now for essentially forever. So politicians and policymakers can try to steer reality to bend to their will, but Mother Nature wins in the end. We can't do the impossible. So the world is politically not prepared in this sense. The illusion that we are going to abandon oil, gas, and coal, the idea that that can happen easily and quickly. I'm not saying it can never happen, but we're talking timeframes of a century or centuries, not a decade. So the illusion that that was happening and could happen easily and inexpensively causes the world to be unprepared to supply the amount of oil, gas, and coal, especially oil and oil in particular, oil and natural gas, that the world will need based on population growth continues and wealth growth continues. The danger of not being prepared, obviously, is you're undersupplied, and undersupply always means price escalations. The market will respond to high prices to produce more, but this is the real danger. I think that there is a slow but visible return to, I'll call, energy sanity. That not that we are abandoning new energy technologies, and nuclear isn't important. Solar doesn't have a huge role. It does. And there'll be lots more EVs. But the return to sanity is the equivalent of the recognition that there will be lots of oil used to move vehicles for a very long time, as well as lots more EVs. That restoration of that kind of return to sanity has begun. You see it in policies. In Europe, for example, they've EU designated natural gas as an allowable transition fuel, which makes it eligible for subsidies to be actually, put pipelines in and build systems. So there's a recognition, and I realize the tension here is the narrative that we have to abandon hydrocarbons because burning them emits CO2, and CO2 is the gas. It's the principal gas in causing global warming. And yes, CO2 does cause warming. The atmosphere is warmer. It's just statistical fact. But in my world, I try to point out there are two magisteria. They're related but independent. The magisteria of the physics of how the climate works, which is very complicated, about which we can't do many experiments that have meaning because the time frames are so long. So it's all theoretical, observational. Then there's the magisteria of energy physics, and energy engineering, which is extremely well understood. There's very little uncertainties in that world. And what I'm saying is that whatever you want to have happen, and whatever you believe is true about the magistery of science, of climate, is totally independent. They're totally unrelated to what the facts are in the magistery of how energy systems work. So I only address not why you want to change the energy systems, but whether you can. And the truth is you can't change them in scale, in timeframes that have meaning for the world. So that reality, I think, is becoming clearer to many policymakers, even the ones who don't like it. And then it raises different questions. If using fuels has a consequence that we think is negative, if we think that you believe the climate models, okay, then what do you do? Well, the answer is you spend money on adaptation and resilience. And you're seeing a restoration in the environmental community, not universal, but a restoration of the recognition that that's what we should be spending money on. And that's a good thing, because even if the climate models are exaggerated, making a society more resilient and adaptive to the insults from nature is a very good thing. To do that requires money. And so this is where my bottom line is. If you replace an inexpensive energy system with an expensive energy system based on the aspiration of getting rid of the inexpensive one, you've squandered money when you can't get rid of the inexpensive one. And wealth is important.
The last of the last, please. So you do not believe on a world without subsidies in energy?
We can't escape all subsidies. They're wired into human nature. But I oppose excessive subsidies that are taken on for too long. So there's no real. I generally oppose subsidies. I mean, from a market philosophy perspective, I don't.
Uh-huh.
But there are always exceptions. You could say that for strategic reasons, for national security, I need to subsidize this for a while. Okay, just explain that it's a non-market clearing subsidy and
Yeah.
why you're doing it. But if you're saying that I want to replace internal combustion engine cars with battery powered cars by subsidizing them forever, which is essentially
Forever.
well, and then they're not economical, and then you're causing a destruction of wealth.
Deformation. Yeah.
So it's a distortion, but doesn't mean that I oppose any catalytic, we'll call them catalytic subsidies, but we're far beyond catalytic subsidies in energy systems, because there are no new energy systems in operation. In fact, I'll tell you, it's the last point, the physics tell you there is no new energy system available yet. Fusion is still a dream. One day it'll happen. We'll see.
Yeah. Oh, we have a technical problem. Freeze a little bit. Let's see if return. Hello, hello. It's not working. Sorry about that. We have a technical problem. I don't know if it's my side or Mark Mills' side. Let me remove and put him again. Remove and put again. Let's see. No, he's out. Let's give him 30 seconds to see if he can come back to our. He is offline. Okay. Okay, thank you so much. It was Mark Mills with us. It was a great pleasure. Mark Mills is this person here. Let me show you again. And we talked about the hidden costs in energy, in the energy sector.